Have you ever noticed that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most respected? On the other hand, there's always someone who says very little, but then, when they do speak, the entire room goes silent. Suddenly, all eyes are on them. This isn't luck. It's not some random occurrence. Rather, it's a skill, one that can be learned. You see, attraction isn't about putting on a performance. In fact, it has very little to do with what you say and everything to do with how you carry yourself. What's more, the most magnetic people don't chase attention. Instead, they pull it toward them without effort. So what's their secret? Well, to put it simply, it all comes down to a few rare, yet incredibly powerful habits. And today, we're breaking down 4 of them, each one deeply rooted in Stoic philosophy. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how to develop a quiet, commanding presence that makes people stop, listen, and respect you without you even trying. Let's dive in. Habit 1. Leading with quiet confidence and self-assurance. Let's explore how quiet confidence and self-assurance create a compelling Stoic presence that naturally draws others toward you, building upon the foundation of authenticity we established in our previous discussion of Stoic attractiveness. Imagine yourself in a high-stakes meeting where important decisions are being made. Around the conference table, you observe various expressions of confidence. One colleague dominates the conversation with loud assertions and sweeping claims, interrupting others mid-sentence. Another constantly seeks validation, ending every statement with, "Don't you think?" or "Does that make sense?" Then there's the person who remains largely silent until a critical moment arises, and when they finally speak, calmly, clearly, and without fanfare, the entire room pauses to listen. What makes this third person so magnetically compelling? Why does their quiet presence command more genuine respect than the forceful personality who seems determined to fill every moment of silence? As you watch this dynamic unfold, you might feel a mixture of admiration and curiosity, perhaps wondering if you yourself lean toward overcompensation in your own expression of confidence. Do you sometimes speak more loudly or frequently when feeling insecure? Do you find yourself seeking external validation through unnecessary explanations or apologies? Or perhaps you withdraw entirely when uncertain, missing opportunities to contribute valuable insights? These natural reactions stem from a fundamental human desire to be respected and taken seriously. We all crave recognition of our competence and worth. Yet the methods we often employ to project confidence, dominating conversations, fishing for compliments, displaying credentials, or even withdrawing to avoid potential criticism, frequently achieve the opposite effect. They signal insecurity rather than assurance, creating a sense of disconnect between our external presentation and internal reality. What if there's another way to embody confidence, one that doesn't require constant assertion or external validation? What if true confidence actually manifests most powerfully through restraint rather than demonstration, through presence rather than performance? The typical reaction to situations requiring confidence often falls into one of 2 counterproductive patterns. On one hand, many people adopt an aggressive, domineering approach characterized by loud speech, interruptions, dogmatic statements, and sometimes even subtle put-downs of others. They believe that asserting dominance will establish their authority and competence. On the other hand, some respond to uncertainty with excessive self-deprecation, constant qualification of their statements, or a desperate search for external validation. Both approaches stem from the same misconception that confidence must be explicitly demonstrated or verbally established rather than simply embodied. Unfortunately, these common reactions produce consistently negative outcomes. The domineering approach often alienates others, creating resistance rather than respect. People may comply with your requests out of obligation, but rarely offer their genuine support or regard. Meanwhile, excessive self-deprecation and validation-seeking behavior undermines your credibility, reinforcing your own internal doubts and signaling to others that your contributions require verification. In both cases, the fundamental issue is the same: an external locus of evaluation where your sense of worth depends on others' perceptions rather than your own internal standards. So what alternative might better serve both your relationships and your self-development? How can you project genuine confidence without resorting to either domination or self-deprecation? This is where Stoic philosophy offers a revolutionary perspective on confidence, one that centers on internal validation and quiet self-assurance rather than external demonstration. The Stoic approach to confidence is not about convincing others of your worth, but about knowing your worth so deeply that external validation becomes unnecessary. This quiet confidence manifests not through what you say about yourself, but through how you carry yourself in every interaction. The Stoic conception of confidence rests on several foundational principles. First is the distinction between what lies within our control and what doesn't, what Epictetus called the dichotomy of control. According to Stoic philosophy, true confidence comes from recognizing that while we cannot control others' opinions or external outcomes, we maintain complete agency over our own judgments, values, and actions. This realization liberates us from the exhausting pursuit of external validation, allowing us to develop what Marcus Aurelius called an inner citadel, a core of self-worth impervious to external opinion. Second, Stoicism emphasizes rational self-assessment based on virtue rather than comparison. Rather than measuring yourself against others' achievements or social status, focus on your adherence to virtue, your personal growth, and your contributions. This creates a stable foundation for confidence that doesn't fluctuate with changing circumstances or others' reactions. To apply these principles in daily life, start by conducting an honest inventory of your strengths and weaknesses without the distorting influence of ego. Acknowledge your capabilities without exaggeration while identifying areas for improvement without self-judgment. This balanced self-knowledge forms the bedrock of genuine confidence. Next, practice maintaining composure in challenging situations. When others become agitated or aggressive, consciously slow your breathing and speech. Stand tall with relaxed shoulders and maintain comfortable eye contact. Your physical bearing communicates volumes about your internal state. Develop the discipline of speaking only when you have something valuable to contribute, resisting the urge to fill silence out of discomfort or to assert your presence. When you do speak, eliminate qualifiers like just, sort of, or I might be wrong, but that undermine your message. Make clear, direct statements without apology or excessive explanation. Similarly, learn to make decisions based on your own judgment, without seeking consensus or permission when it's not required. This doesn't mean ignoring others' input, but rather trusting your ability to evaluate that input and reach sound conclusions. Perhaps most importantly, practice accepting criticism without defensiveness. Someone with genuine confidence can hear negative feedback without feeling threatened, because their self-worth doesn't depend on perfect performance or universal approval. When criticized, pause before responding. Consider whether there's truth in the critique that can help you improve. Then acknowledge valuable input while calmly standing your ground on matters where you remain convinced of your position. The results of cultivating this Stoic confidence are profound and far-reaching. Like a mountain unmoved by changing weather, you develop stability amid chaos. Others naturally turn to you during crises because your composure signals reliability. Your words carry greater weight precisely because you use them economically. Most importantly, you experience the deep tranquility that comes from self-acceptance and internal validation, a state the Stoics called apatheia, not apathy in the modern sense, but freedom from disturbing passions. My own journey toward quiet confidence presented itself dramatically during a company reorganization that left my department facing significant budget cuts. As the team lead for a critical project, I was scheduled to present our ongoing work to the executive committee, the same committee that would ultimately decide which projects would continue receiving funding and which would be terminated. The pressure was immense. My team had spent months developing an innovative approach to customer engagement that showed promising early results but required substantial additional investment before it would generate significant returns. The stakes felt impossibly high, not just for the project itself, but for the careers of the 12 team members who had poured their creativity and effort into its development. In the days leading up to the presentation, anxiety consumed me. I rehearsed obsessively, created elaborate slides packed with data points, and prepared extensive justifications for every decision we'd made. My initial reaction was classic overcompensation. I planned to overwhelm the committee with information, leaving no possible question unanswered, no potential criticism unaddressed. I even prepared a slightly aggressive opening statement emphasizing how our competitors were implementing similar initiatives, hoping to trigger fear of being left behind. The night before the presentation, exhausted from preparation and still deeply unsatisfied with my approach, I remembered a passage from Marcus Aurelius. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. In this case, the injury was the pressure to perform, to prove our worth through desperation. What if, instead of meeting that pressure with matching intensity, I approached this challenge with calm assurance? I scrapped my elaborate presentation and created a new one with just 5 key slides. Instead of overwhelming the committee with data, I selected only the most compelling metrics that told our story clearly. Rather than beginning with competitive threats, I opened with a simple, powerful statement about our purpose and progress. Most importantly, I decided to present not as someone begging for resources, but as someone confidently sharing an opportunity. When I walked into the boardroom the next day, I felt a remarkable shift. Gone was the desperate need to convince. In its place was a calm certainty about the value of our work. I spoke more slowly than usual, maintained steady eye contact, and allowed strategic pauses after key points. When committee members raised concerns, some quite pointed, I listened fully before responding, acknowledged valid criticisms without defensiveness, and calmly provided context where misconceptions had arisen. What surprised me most wasn't just that our project received continued funding. It was how dramatically the committee's engagement shifted throughout the presentation. Initially skeptical and somewhat dismissive, They gradually leaned forward with increasing interest. Questions transformed from challenges to genuine curiosity. By the end, the CFO, who had been most vocal about budget constraints, was actively suggesting additional applications for our approach. Later, my director shared something remarkable. The committee had actually decided before the meeting to terminate our project along with several others. What changed their minds wasn't just the content of the presentation, but, in the CEO's words, the quiet confidence that made us believe this team could actually deliver. My calm assurance had communicated more about our capability than any amount of data or aggressive persuasion could have. The significance of this experience extends far beyond that single presentation. I realized that true confidence isn't about proving yourself through force of personality or overwhelming evidence. It's about knowing your worth so deeply that you no longer need to prove it at all. When you operate from this internal certainty, paradoxically, others become more likely to recognize and respect your value. The energy previously consumed by anxiety and overcompensation becomes available for clarity of thought and genuine connection. The lesson is both simple and profound. In a world where insecurity often manifests as aggression or validation seeking, quiet confidence stands out precisely because of its rarity. By grounding yourself in Stoic principles, focusing on what you can control, maintaining rational self-assessment, and cultivating inner stability, you develop a presence that naturally attracts others, not through demand, but through invitation. Your silent self-assurance speaks volumes more than even the most eloquent self-promotion ever could. Habit 2. The magnetic force of empathy and compassion. Let's explore how empathy and compassion create a profound magnetic pull in our relationships with others, completing our examination of Stoic silent attractiveness by revealing how genuine concern for others complements the self-mastery we've developed through authenticity and quiet confidence. Imagine yourself walking into a crowded coffee shop on a busy Monday morning. The line stretches to the door, filled with people impatiently checking their watches and smartphones. The baristas move with frantic energy, their faces tight with stress as they try to keep pace with the mounting orders. As you wait, you notice a young woman at the counter stumbling over her complex order, clearly anxious as she senses the collective irritation building behind her. The manager approaches, interrupting her mid-sentence with a curt, "Ma'am, could you please decide? There are people waiting." Her face flushes with embarrassment as she quickly settles on something simpler than she wanted, hurriedly paying and stepping aside. In moments like these, what thoughts typically cross your mind? Perhaps a flicker of relief that the line will move faster, or maybe a touch of sympathy quickly overridden by your own morning rush concerns. You might even feel a whisper of judgment. Why didn't she prepare her order while waiting? Haven't we all experienced that uncomfortable pressure of holding up a line? The collective impatience in these situations creates a palpable tension, a subtle social pressure that prioritizes efficiency over humanity. These reactions arise naturally in our fast-paced world, where time holds premium value and delays register as personal inconveniences rather than shared human moments. As you observe this brief interaction, something about it leaves you uneasy. The woman collects her simplified order, her shoulders slightly hunched as she leaves without the customary tip or thank you. The manager returns to the espresso machine, the momentary tension dissipating but leaving behind a residue of disconnection. You wonder, in this exchange focused on speed and efficiency, what vital human element was sacrificed? What if there was a different way to navigate such moments? One that honors both practical concerns and human dignity. The typical reaction in today's rushed social interactions tends towards self-preservation and efficiency. We prioritize our own agenda, viewing other people primarily as either facilitators or obstacles. When someone delays our progress, whether in traffic, checkout lines, or workplace interactions, we often respond with visible or internal impatience. We avoid eye contact, check our phones, sigh audibly, or otherwise signal our disapproval. If forced to engage, we keep interactions transactional and minimal, focusing on resolving the immediate situation rather than connecting with the person before us. This reaction stems from our default setting of self-centeredness, not because we're inherently selfish, but because our own perspective naturally dominates our awareness. The consequences of this approach extend far beyond momentary discomfort. Each transaction-focused interaction reinforces a culture of disconnection where people feel interchangeable and disposable. We create environments where efficiency trumps humanity, where being acknowledged as a person with inherent worth becomes the exception rather than the norm. On a personal level, this orientation robs us of meaningful connections that could otherwise enrich our daily experience. We may complete our task more quickly, but at the cost of the nourishing human contact that research consistently links to well-being and longevity. Moreover, we miss countless opportunities to exercise our uniquely human capacity for empathy. Opportunities that could transform routine interactions into moments of genuine connection. What would happen if we approach these same situations with a fundamentally different mindset? How might our experience and the experiences of those around us transform if we prioritize connection over convenience, even in brief encounters? This is where Stoic philosophy offers a revolutionary perspective, particularly through its concept of cosmopolitanism, the view that all humans are citizens of one world community, interconnected and deserving of concern regardless of their relationship to us. Unlike some philosophical traditions that require detachment from worldly concerns, Stoicism encourages active engagement with others through the practice of empathy and compassion, seeing these qualities not as emotional weaknesses, but as expressions of our rational recognition of shared humanity. Through this lens, the capacity to genuinely care about others becomes not just a moral virtue, but a powerful force of silent attractiveness, drawing people toward us through the rare quality of authentic human connection. The Stoic approach to empathy and compassion rests on several foundational principles. First is the concept of oikeiosis, the recognition that our concerns naturally extend beyond ourselves to encompass others, beginning with those closest to us but ideally expanding to include all of humanity. Marcus Aurelius expressed this interconnectedness beautifully. We were born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the two rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural. This perspective shifts our understanding of empathy from a purely emotional response to a rational recognition of our interconnected nature. Second, Stoicism emphasizes prosouche, focused attention on the present moment. This mindfulness practice enables us to truly see others, rather than viewing them through the distorting lens of our preoccupations. By cultivating present moment awareness, we create space for genuine empathic connection, even in brief interactions. Finally, Stoicism teaches that virtue, including justice and humanity toward others, is the only true good, more valuable than external advantages like efficiency or convenience. This prioritization provides a clear framework for making choices that honor human dignity, even when doing so requires personal sacrifice. To apply these principles in everyday life, begin by practicing intentional presence. When interacting with others, whether friends, colleagues, or strangers, temporarily set aside your mental to-do list and fully attend to the person before you. Notice their facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language. Resist the urge to formulate your response while they're still speaking. Instead, listen with genuine curiosity about their experience. This simple shift in attention communicates respect more powerfully than any words. Develop the habit of perspective-taking by regularly asking yourself, what might this situation look like from their position? When someone acts in ways you find frustrating, pause before judgment and consider what circumstances or internal experiences might be driving their behavior. Remember that, as Plato observed, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. This doesn't mean excusing harmful actions, but rather approaching others with an awareness of our shared human struggles. Practice small acts of compassion throughout your day. Make eye contact and offer a genuine smile to service workers. Express appreciation for specific actions rather than general platitudes. When you notice someone struggling, whether with a heavy door while carrying packages or with finding the right words in a conversation, offer assistance without making them feel inadequate. These seemingly minor gestures create ripples of connection that extend far beyond the immediate interaction. Cultivate the discipline of responding rather than reacting. When faced with behavior that triggers irritation or judgment, pause before allowing these initial feelings to dictate your response. Take a breath and consciously choose a response grounded in empathy rather than ego protection. This might mean responding to rudeness with calm kindness or to impatience with deliberate understanding. The results of this approach manifest in both subtle and profound ways. You'll notice immediate shifts in the quality of your interactions as people respond to being truly seen and valued. Over time, you'll develop a reputation as someone who can be trusted with vulnerabilities and genuine concerns. People will increasingly seek your company and counsel, drawn by the rare experience of feeling fully acknowledged. Most importantly, you'll experience the deep fulfillment that comes from genuine human connection, what the Stoics would recognize as living in accordance with our social nature. My own understanding of empathy's magnetic force came through an unexpected workplace relationship that transformed not just my professional life, but my approach to human connection altogether. When I transferred to a new department, I was immediately warned about Sharon, an administrative assistant with a reputation for being difficult, uncooperative, and perpetually disgruntled. Colleagues described her as the department's gatekeeper, someone to be carefully managed or, ideally, bypassed entirely. During my first week, I needed access to archive files for an urgent project. Following my colleague's advice, I approached Sharon with a carefully worded request, complete with the required forms filled out in advance. Her response was exactly as predicted. A curt explanation that retrievals typically took 3 business days, coupled with a barely concealed eye roll when I mentioned my deadline. My initial reaction combined irritation with a touch of righteousness. Here was the difficult person I'd been warned about, confirming every negative story I'd heard. I felt the familiar urge to escalate the situation, perhaps mentioning the importance of my project or appealing to her supervisor. Instead, something made me pause. I noticed the towers of paperwork surrounding her desk, the constantly ringing phone she managed single-handedly, and the steady stream of people approaching with their own urgent requests. I saw beyond my immediate frustration to a person likely overwhelmed and underappreciated. Rather than pressing my case, I shifted approach entirely. "It looks like you're juggling a lot today," I said quietly. "I can see why additional rush requests would be difficult to accommodate." Her defensive posture softened slightly at this acknowledgement. I continued, "I don't want to add to your workload unnecessarily. Could you help me understand what might be possible? Even partial access would be helpful." This wasn't a strategic ploy, but a genuine attempt to see the situation from her perspective. Sharon studied me for a moment, clearly assessing whether this represented genuine understanding or manipulation. Then something remarkable happened. She explained that the department had recently transitioned to a new filing system, while simultaneously losing her assistant to budget cuts. She was working overtime just to keep up with current requests. Instead of dismissing me, however, she offered a compromise. She couldn't retrieve all the files immediately, but could provide access to the most recent ones that afternoon, which would allow me to begin my work. As I thanked her, our conversation naturally extended. I learned she'd been with the company for 22 years, possessed institutional knowledge that existed nowhere in our official documentation, and had developed systems that kept our department functioning despite chronic understaffing. What began as a transactional request became the foundation for a genuine working relationship built on mutual respect. What surprised me most about this experience wasn't just Sharon's eventual helpfulness, but how dramatically our relationship evolved over the following months. The woman everyone described as difficult became my most valued ally in navigating institutional challenges. She began proactively alerting me to resources relevant to my projects, introducing me to key personnel across departments, and sharing insights that saved me countless hours of trial and error. When colleagues expressed surprise at our rapport, Sharon's explanation was illuminating. "Most people treat me like a vending machine for files. They get frustrated when I don't instantly produce what they want. You're one of the few who's ever seen me as a person first." The significance of this shift extends far beyond practical workplace advantages. By approaching Sharon with empathy rather than entitlement, I had inadvertently challenged a dehumanizing dynamic that had persisted for years. My simple act of perspective-taking, recognizing her constraints, and acknowledging her challenges had created a crack in the defensive armor she'd built through years of being treated as an obstacle rather than a contributor. What's more, this single relationship transformed my standing in the department. Others noticed our positive interactions and began approaching me as someone who could successfully navigate difficult situations and personalities. The lesson became clear. Empathy and compassion aren't just moral virtues, they're practical forces of attraction. In a world where transactional relationships dominate, the simple act of recognizing another's humanity becomes revolutionary. True empathy, seeing people as complete beings with their own struggles, constraints, and values, creates connections that no amount of charm or strategic networking can duplicate. By cultivating the Stoic practice of extending our concern beyond ourselves, we develop a quiet magnetism that draws others into our orbit, not through manipulation or demand, but through the profound human experience of being truly seen, understood, and valued. Habit 3. Embracing self-respect and intentional self-care. Let's explore how the ancient Stoic philosophy approaches self-respect and intentional self-care as essential components of a virtuous life. Building upon our previous discussions about developing resilience in the face of adversity. In the Stoic tradition, Caring for oneself is not merely about superficial appearance or indulgent pampering, but rather a profound expression of self-valuation and respect for one's inherent dignity as a rational being. The Stoics recognize that properly caring for oneself, physically, mentally, and emotionally, creates the foundation from which all other virtues can flourish. This philosophy stands in stark contrast to modern misconceptions that might interpret self-care as selfish or self-indulgent. Instead, it positions appropriate self-regard as a duty to oneself and to society. When we take the time to cultivate ourselves intentionally, we become better equipped to serve others and fulfill our roles in society with excellence and integrity. By honoring ourselves through mindful self-care practices, we acknowledge our responsibility to present our best selves to the world, not out of vanity, but out of respect for our own potential and for those with whom we interact. Imagine waking up on a particularly challenging Monday morning after a weekend filled with social obligations that left you mentally and physically drained. Your alarm blares, and immediately you feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on you. Your first instinct is to roll out of bed, throw on whatever clothes are nearest, grab coffee, and rush out the door to meet your professional obligations. As you hurriedly prepare, catching a glimpse of yourself in the mirror, you notice the dark circles under your eyes, the disheveled appearance, and the general aura of fatigue surrounding you. In this moment, you might feel a sense of resignation. This is just how life is. Or perhaps even pride in your ability to push through, despite your depleted state. After all, isn't sacrificing personal well-being for productivity what our society often celebrates as dedication? Have you ever found yourself in this cycle where caring for your own needs feels somehow selfish or unnecessary? How often do you postpone basic self-care rituals, adequate sleep, nutritious meals, moments of reflection, proper grooming, because other demands seem more pressing? The emotional toll of this neglect accumulates gradually, often unnoticed until manifestations of burnout, resentment, or health issues emerge. You might experience a creeping sense of unworthiness, as if you don't deserve the time and attention required for proper self-care. Perhaps you've internalized messages suggesting that attending to your own needs indicates weakness or self-indulgence. But what if this perspective fundamentally misunderstands the purpose and value of self-care? What if, contrary to viewing self-care as selfish, the Stoics recognized it as an essential duty, not just to ourselves, but to everyone we encounter? How might our understanding shift if we recognize that neglecting ourselves doesn't actually serve others better, but instead presents a diminished version of ourselves to the world? The Stoic philosophers would suggest that this common pattern of self-neglect represents a profound misalignment with nature and our duties as rational beings. They would propose an alternative approach that honors both our responsibilities to ourselves and to others, without sacrificing either. The typical reaction to overwhelming demands on our time and energy is to deprioritize self-care. We often postpone proper rest, nutrition, exercise, and personal grooming in favor of meeting external obligations. "I'll sleep when this project is finished," we tell ourselves. Or, "I don't have time for a proper meal today." We might wear this self-sacrifice as a badge of honor, believing it demonstrates our commitment to others or to our work. However, this approach fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between self-care and our ability to fulfill our duties effectively. When we consistently neglect ourselves, the consequences ripple outward in ways we might not immediately recognize. Our decision-making deteriorates as mental fatigue sets in. Our interactions with others become strained as emotional reserves deplete. Our physical health suffers, reducing our capacity to engage fully in meaningful activities. Perhaps most significantly, we implicitly communicate something troubling to ourselves and others, that we do not value ourselves enough to ensure we are functioning at our best. This unconscious message undermines our presence and effectiveness in every domain of life. Consider how differently we might approach our responsibilities if we began from a foundation of appropriate self-regard. What if, instead of viewing self-care as time taken away from our duties, we recognized it as essential preparation for fulfilling those duties excellently? How might our effectiveness and sense of purpose transform if we approach self-care not as self-indulgence, but as self-respect? Stoic philosophy offers a compelling reframing of self-care that resolves this apparent conflict. The Stoics understood that caring for oneself properly is not separate from one's duties. It is itself a primary duty. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the most influential Stoic teachers, emphasized that we have specific roles to fulfill in life, and properly preparing ourselves to execute these roles with excellence is a fundamental responsibility. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, dedicated time each morning to prepare himself mentally for the day's challenges, recognizing that presenting his best self to his subjects and his responsibilities constituted an ethical obligation. These philosophers understood that self-respect manifests in how we treat ourselves, and that this treatment directly impacts our ability to serve others and fulfill our purpose. The Stoic approach to self-care stems from their foundational principle of living according to nature, which includes recognizing and honoring our needs as rational and social beings. For the Stoics, proper self-care was never about vanity or excess, concepts they would have criticized vigorously. Instead, they viewed appropriate care of the self as a manifestation of respect for one's inherent dignity and a prerequisite for living virtuously. Musonius Rufus, often called the Roman Socrates, taught that we should care for our bodies not primarily for aesthetic reasons, but because a well-maintained body better serves the mind's pursuit of wisdom and virtue. Similarly, Seneca advised taking walks in nature and periods of rest not as indulgences, but as necessary practices that restore our capacity for clear thinking and appropriate action. To apply this philosophy in daily life, begin by examining your self-care practices through the lens of purpose rather than pleasure. Ask yourself, does this practice help me present my best self to the world? Does it enhance my capacity to fulfill my duties with excellence? This doesn't mean eliminating enjoyment. The Stoics were not ascetics who denied all pleasure, but rather ensuring that your self-care serves a higher purpose than mere sensory gratification. For instance, when choosing what to eat, consider not just what tastes good, but what will provide sustained energy and mental clarity. When deciding what to wear, select attire that communicates respect for yourself and the context you'll enter. When planning your schedule, allocate time for adequate sleep, recognizing it as necessary for optimal cognitive and emotional functioning, rather than a luxury to be sacrificed. Develop routines that honor your physical health through regular exercise, nutritious eating, and sufficient rest. Protect your mental well-being through practices like journaling, meditation, or reflective reading. Activities the Stoics themselves often recommended. Attend to your appearance not out of vanity, but as a demonstration that you value yourself enough to present yourself with dignity. Set appropriate boundaries around your time and energy. understanding that allowing yourself to become depleted serves neither you nor those who depend on you. The results of this approach emerge gradually but profoundly. You'll likely notice improved resilience in the face of challenges as your reserves of physical and emotional energy remain adequately replenished. Your interactions with others may become more measured and effective, undistorted by the irritability that often accompanies self-neglect. Perhaps most significantly, you'll cultivate a sense of inner tranquility that comes from knowing you're honoring your responsibilities to yourself as conscientiously as you honor your responsibilities to others. This integration, where care for self and care for others are no longer in competition but in harmony, epitomizes the Stoic ideal of living virtuously in accordance with nature. Several years ago, I found myself in a particularly demanding phase of my career while simultaneously navigating some challenging family dynamics. I was working long hours on an important research project with approaching deadlines while also trying to support my father through a health crisis. My typical approach had always been to power through difficult periods by sacrificing personal needs. I prided myself on requiring minimal sleep, skipping meals when busy, and generally putting myself last. During this period, my morning routine consisted of rolling out of bed and immediately checking emails, often still in pajamas until noon. Physical exercise had become non-existent, and meals were whatever would be consumed quickly, usually at my desk. I rationalized this as dedication to both my work and my family. The breaking point came during an important presentation to colleagues. As I stood before them, exhausted and underprepared, I realized I was struggling to articulate concepts I normally understood clearly. My thinking felt foggy, my delivery lacked confidence, and I was painfully aware of my disheveled appearance. More concerning was my realization afterward that I had spoken impatiently to a junior colleague who had asked a perfectly reasonable question. I had become a diminished version of myself professionally and personally, yet somehow believed this self-sacrifice was serving others. That evening, I recalled reading about Stoic approaches to self-care in a philosophy book months earlier. The author had emphasized that the Stoics viewed proper self-care not as self-indulgence, but as preparation for excellence in one's duties. This perspective resonated deeply in that moment of recognition. The next morning, I made a deliberate change. I woke 30 minutes earlier to engage in a brief meditation practice before looking at any devices. I took time to shower, dress thoughtfully, and eat a proper breakfast. Before heading to the office, I walked for 20 minutes in a nearby park, using the time to mentally prepare for my responsibilities rather than immediately diving into emails. These small changes felt almost revolutionary. At first, I worried I was being self-indulgent by wasting time on these practices, but I committed to the experiment for at least 2 weeks, curious to see how it might affect my performance and well-being. I also established a firm boundary of leaving work by 6:30 p.m., ensuring I had time to properly rest before the next day. When visiting my father in the hospital, I made sure to arrive prepared and present rather than exhausted and distracted. I began carrying a small notebook to jot down insights or concerns, a practice that helped clear my mind for whatever task was at hand. The results of these seemingly small changes surprised me profoundly. Within days, colleagues commented on my improved presence in meetings, noting that I seemed more focused and constructive. My ability to navigate complex problems returned, and the quality of my work improved despite spending fewer total hours at my desk. Perhaps most significantly, My interactions with both colleagues and family members became more patient and attentive. I found myself truly listening rather than merely waiting for my turn to speak, a change that transformed the quality of these relationships. What I came to understand through this experience was that my previous approach, sacrificing self-care in service to others, had been fundamentally misguided. By neglecting myself, I had been offering a diminished version of my capabilities to both my professional responsibilities and my family obligations. The Stoic perspective helped me recognize that appropriate self-care isn't separate from fulfilling one's duties. It's an essential prerequisite. By honoring my own needs for adequate rest, nourishment, and preparation, I became far more effective in my various roles and responsibilities. This experience taught me that self-respect manifests in the small, daily decisions we make about how to treat ourselves. Each time we choose to honor our needs for proper rest, nourishment, reflection, and presentation, we affirm our own worth and enhance our capacity to contribute meaningfully to the world around us. The Stoics were right. Self-care practiced with the right intention, not vanity or self-indulgence, but preparation for excellence in our duties, becomes a virtuous act rather than a selfish one. This subtle but profound shift in perspective transformed not just my daily habits, but my entire approach to balancing responsibilities to myself and others. Habit 4. The subtle charm of mystery and selective engagement. Let's explore how cultivating a sense of mystery and practicing selective engagement represent powerful expressions of Stoic wisdom, building upon our previous discussion of self-respect and intentional self-care. In the Stoic tradition, there exists a profound understanding that not everything within us needs external validation or expression, that there is virtue in carefully choosing what we reveal about ourselves and when we choose to engage with others. This concept stands in contrast to our modern culture's emphasis on constant connectivity and comprehensive self-disclosure. The Stoics recognize that maintaining a certain reserve, not out of deception or emotional unavailability, but out of self-respect and thoughtful intention, creates space for genuine connection and preserves our inner tranquility. By developing discernment about what we share, with whom, and under what circumstances, we honor the private sanctuary of our inner thoughts while simultaneously enhancing the quality and depth of our interpersonal interactions. Through this practice, we discover that selective engagement often leads to more meaningful connections than constant availability, and that maintaining some aspects of ourselves as private creates an authentic intrigue that draws others toward our genuine nature rather than toward a curated performance. Imagine attending a social gathering where you encounter a colleague who seems to dominate every conversation. This person shares every detail of their weekend plans, relationship developments, workplace frustrations, and personal accomplishments within minutes of arrival. Their social media accounts mirror this pattern. Dozens of daily updates cataloging meals, moods, minor inconveniences, and momentary thoughts. You notice how quickly people's attention drifts when this person speaks, how conversations with them feel predictable and one-sided, and how, despite knowing countless facts about their life, you feel no genuine connection to who they truly are beneath the constant stream of information. In contrast, across the room stands someone who speaks less frequently but draws people in when they do. This person listens intently, asks thoughtful questions, and shares selected insights rather than volunteering every detail of their existence. You find yourself curious about them, eager to learn more, And when they do reveal something personal, it feels like a genuine moment of connection rather than a performance. Their selective engagement creates a magnetic quality that the oversharer, despite all their efforts, fails to achieve. Have you ever found yourself in either position, either sharing compulsively to fill silence and gain attention, or feeling drained by those who do? Have you noticed how our digital culture encourages constant updates and comprehensive transparency about our lives, creating pressure to continually broadcast our experiences? Perhaps you've experienced that peculiar emptiness that follows oversharing, that vulnerable feeling of having revealed too much too soon, leaving nothing sacred or private. Or maybe you've noticed how quickly people seem to categorize and dismiss those whose lives they can fully access without effort. What if this compulsion toward complete transparency actually undermines the connections we seek to create? What if, contrary to popular belief, selective engagement and thoughtful restraint in self-disclosure aren't barriers to intimacy but prerequisites for it? The Stoic philosophers would suggest that our modern impulse toward constant visibility and accessibility represents a fundamental misunderstanding of human connection. They would propose that genuine relationships develop not through immediate and complete access to another's inner world, but through gradual, earned revelations that honor both the sharer and the recipient. The typical reaction to our hyper-connected world is to match its pace and transparency expectations. Many of us feel compelled to share our thoughts immediately as they arise, to document experiences as they occur rather than fully experiencing them first, and to make ourselves constantly available for engagement across multiple platforms. This impulse stems from understandable human needs for connection, validation, and relevance in a rapidly moving social landscape. We fear that without constant visibility, we might be forgotten or overlooked. Without immediate responses to messages and invitations, we might appear disinterested or rude. Without comprehensive sharing, we might seem mysterious in an unsettling rather than intriguing way. However, this reactive approach to engagement often produces consequences that directly undermine our initial goals. When we share indiscriminately, we dilute the impact of what's truly meaningful. Our significant life developments get lost among trivial updates, receiving the same cursory attention as our coffee preferences or traffic complaints. Constant availability frequently leads to shallow connections across a broad network rather than deeper relationships with select individuals. Perhaps most significantly, the habit of immediate external processing, sharing thoughts before we've fully considered them ourselves, can disconnect us from our own internal compass and authentic perspective. Furthermore, the psychological toll of constant engagement is substantial. Studies consistently show correlations between social media use and anxiety, suggesting that perpetual connectivity often increases rather than alleviates social concerns. When every thought and experience is immediately externalized for validation, we become dependent on outside responses to determine our own satisfaction with our choices and experiences. This externalization of validation directly contradicts the Stoic emphasis on finding contentment through internal alignment with virtue rather than external approval. What if there were an approach that allowed for meaningful connection without the exhaustion of constant availability? How might our relationships transform if we engaged more selectively and intentionally rather than reactively and comprehensively? What quality of presence might we bring to our interactions if we approach them as carefully curated exchanges rather than continuous streams of consciousness? The Stoic philosophy offers precisely this alternative vision for engagement. The Stoics understood that meaningful human connection doesn't require complete transparency or constant availability. Instead, they emphasize the value of purposeful speech, thoughtful silence, and selective engagement as pathways to both personal tranquility and authentic relationships. Their approach suggests that by carefully choosing when, how, and with whom we engage, we can create connections of greater depth and significance than those formed through constant but superficial interaction. The Stoic approach to engagement centers on the principle of deliberate choice rather than reactive response. For the Stoics, every act of communication, whether speaking, writing, or even nonverbal expression, represented an opportunity to exercise wisdom, temperance, and discernment. Epictetus advised his students to remain silent in most circumstances until speaking became absolutely necessary, noting that nature has given us one tongue but two ears, that we may hear from others twice as much as we speak. Marcus Aurelius similarly emphasized quality over quantity in communication, writing that we should be satisfied if the smallest thing makes headway. These weren't recommendations for isolation or detachment, but rather for engagement that reflects careful intention rather than habitual reaction. Central to this philosophy is the Stoic understanding of what lies within our control and what doesn't. The Stoics recognize that we cannot control others' perceptions of us, regardless of how much information we provide. Attempting to manage these perceptions through constant disclosure often backfires, creating an inauthentic performance rather than genuine connection. Instead, they advocated focusing on what we can control, our own choices about when and how to engage, what to reveal, and how to present ourselves with dignity and authenticity. To apply this philosophy in daily life, begin by creating intentional pauses before sharing. Before posting on social media, sending a message, or contributing to a conversation, ask yourself, is this necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? Does it improve upon silence? This simple practice introduces space between impulse and action, allowing for more deliberate communication. Resist the urge to fill comfortable silence with unnecessary words. When in conversation, practice active listening without immediately formulating your response. Allow the other person's words to fully land before determining whether and how to reply. Be selective about which invitations and requests you accept. Rather than attempting to maintain surface-level connections with everyone, invest deeply in relationships that align with your values and contribute to your growth. This doesn't mean becoming inaccessible or aloof, but rather bringing your full, undivided presence to fewer, more meaningful engagements rather than scattered attention to many. Practice the art of judicious self-disclosure. Share personal information not as a default mode of interaction, but as a thoughtful choice that honors both yourself and the recipient. Consider the context, the relationship, and your own comfort level before revealing private thoughts or experiences. When you do choose to share something personal, do so with intention and awareness rather than impulse. Cultivate comfort with not being fully known or understood by everyone. The Stoics recognize that our inner world belongs primarily to ourselves, and that not every thought or feeling requires external validation or expression. By maintaining this private sanctuary, we develop greater self-reliance and internal clarity while simultaneously creating an authentic depth that others naturally wish to explore. The results of this approach emerge gradually but distinctly. You may notice that people listen more attentively when you do speak, having learned that your words carry careful thought rather than mere reaction. Your relationships may shift toward greater depth with fewer people, rather than superficial connection with many. Perhaps most significantly, you'll likely experience a growing sense of inner coherence and tranquility as your external expressions align more closely with your authentic self, rather than with social expectations or habitual patterns of engagement. During my first year leading a major creative project at work, I found myself struggling with a particularly challenging dynamic within our team. As the newest director in the department, I felt an immense pressure to demonstrate my competence, accessibility, and collaborative spirit. This manifested in what I now recognize as a pattern of overcompensation. I shared every developing thought about our project, responded to messages at all hours, accepted every meeting invitation regardless of its relevance to my role, and made myself completely transparent in an effort to earn trust and establish my position. I vividly recall a critical team meeting 6 months into the project. We were discussing a significant strategic pivot that would affect everyone's workload and creative direction. As ideas circulated around the table, I found myself jumping in repeatedly with half-formed thoughts, processing my thinking aloud rather than allowing ideas to develop fully before sharing them. I noticed team members exchanging glances as my perspectives shifted multiple times during the conversation. After the meeting, my mentor, a highly respected creative director who typically spoke little but commanded attention when she did, invited me to coffee. "You're exhausting yourself and confusing your team," she said kindly but directly. "They don't need access to your thought process. They need your conclusions after you've done the thinking." She described how my constant availability and comprehensive transparency was actually undermining my authority rather than building it. "Mystery isn't about being enigmatic," she explained. "It's about valuing your thoughts enough to develop them fully before sharing, and valuing others' time enough to be selective about what you bring to them." Her feedback stung but resonated deeply. I realized my approach reflected insecurity rather than openness. I was seeking external validation rather than trusting my own judgment. With her guidance, I began practicing what she called intentional unavailability. I designated specific hours for responding to non-urgent messages, declined meetings where my presence added little value, and most significantly, disciplined myself to develop ideas fully before bringing them to the team. When asked for my thoughts in meetings, I began practicing phrases like, "I'd like to consider that further before responding," or "I have some developing thoughts, but would prefer to hear more perspectives first." Most challenging for me was resisting the impulse to process creative problems collaboratively by default. I had to learn to sit with uncertainty, to allow ideas to incubate privately before exposing them to external input. I began keeping a private idea journal that was just for me, not for sharing, not for validation, but as a space to develop thoughts without the immediate pressure of articulating them perfectly or defending them publicly. The transformation in both my professional effectiveness and personal well-being surprised me profoundly. Rather than diminishing my connection with the team as I had feared, my more selective engagement actually enhanced it. Team members began seeking my input more intentionally, knowing that when I contributed, it represented careful thought rather than reactive processing. Meetings became more productive as I modeled the value of reflective silence and thoughtful restraint. Perhaps most surprisingly, my creative output improved significantly. Ideas had space to develop nuance and originality when sheltered from premature exposure and critique. What I discovered through this experience was the paradoxical power of selective engagement. By making myself less available in quantity, I became more available in quality. By sharing less frequently but more thoughtfully, my contributions carried greater weight. The Stoic wisdom that my mentor had intuitively understood, that not everything needs to be expressed, that careful restraint often communicates more than constant disclosure, proved transformative not just for my professional effectiveness, but for my sense of inner coherence and tranquility. This experience taught me that genuine connection and influence don't emerge from constant visibility or comprehensive transparency, but from thoughtful presence and judicious sharing. The subtle charm of mystery lies not in being deliberately enigmatic or withholding, but in recognizing that our inner world deserves cultivation before expression, and that what we choose not to share is as defining as what we reveal. In a culture that often equates accessibility with authenticity and quantity of engagement with quality of connection, the Stoic practice of selective engagement offers a more sustainable and ultimately more satisfying alternative, one that honors both ourselves and those with whom we choose to engage. These habits, deeply rooted in Stoic principles, offer a pathway to cultivating silent attractiveness by focusing on inner development rather than the pursuit of fleeting external validation. Integrating these habits into daily life is a gradual process that requires self-awareness and a commitment to personal growth. It is important to approach this journey with self-compassion, recognizing that progress takes time and consistent effort. Rather than seeking immediate approval from others, the focus should remain on embodying these qualities for their intrinsic value, aligning with the Stoic emphasis on what is within one's control. Practices such as journaling and self-reflection can be invaluable tools in tracking progress and reinforcing these habits. By regularly examining one's thoughts and actions, individuals can identify areas for improvement and consciously strive to embody the principles of presence, silence, elegance, composure, authenticity, confidence, empathy, self-respect, mystery, and consistency. If this message resonated with you, subscribe for more insights on using Stoicism to navigate life's challenges with clarity and strength. See you in the next video.